All right. Hello, everyone. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late because I chat too much. This is my bad habits over here. Welcome to Woven today. Thank you all for coming out in this wonderful rainy weather that makes us all feel, for Kristen, happy and peaceful. The rest of you can fill in the blanks how you feel in rain weather. It makes me sleepy, so it makes me wish I was in bed, but that's fine. A couple of exciting announcements that are things are coming up. One, today I'm talking with Erica, and we're going to talk about wonderful themes of grace, mercy, forgiveness in conjunction with Lent, because those are themes with the Lenten season, and reevaluating them. We probably don't have any answers. It's probably just ideas, but we'll see what becomes of it. Just so you all know, although John has been the pastor at Beaumont for a while, he actually just got commissioned. And so there will be a celebration on Woven's 5-year anniversary, the 30th, at the 11 o'clock service. So if you would like to come to that and celebrate John actually being a commissioned pastor, there'll be a potluck afterwards. So free food, yay. And after the Woven service that day, which Derek and Caleb will be back on the 30th, we'll have a little reception afterwards for him as well. Another fun thing that is coming in May is Woven's start time is changing. And it will start at 2 instead of 3:30. And that's a boring story, so you can see me afterwards as for the reason why we changed that start time. And that's really the way in announcements today, so just welcome to all of you, regardless of your race, your gender, your socioeconomic status, regardless of what your views on God or the Bible are. We're glad you're here. Today we're going to start with a prayer of the God of solidarity. Thank you for being a God who enters the suffering of the world, who doesn't run from those in pain, but rushes to the side of blood, of tears. Release us from empty cravings of unity that come at no cost to the oppressor, and guide us toward a solidarity that demands something of us. Let us learn to risk ourselves on behalf of the vulnerable, believing that when one of us is harmed, we all are. Help us to remember that justice and liberation are not a scarcity, and that our survival and dignity are wrapped up in one another. And God, keep us from those who will demonize the fight in us, who would prefer us complacent and far from one another. Secure us in the courage to stand, knowing together we will restore what the world has tried to suffocate in us. Amen. So, Daniel is away, but he left me with all the instructions of how to do the upfront part. Great news for all of you. I am terrible at most artistic things. I do paint once a month just for my own self-care, but we're not doing that today either. So up here at this table, we have a bunch of different questions. And so we would ask you all to pick one and just write and kind of journal your thoughts on it. We're just going to put some music on in the background. And if you get through one before the prompt's over in about 10, 15 minutes, you can fill out a second one, since there's enough for people to do two. So that's how we're going to get started today. Yes, you can come up. give everyone like a 2-minute warning before we transition. All right. Thank you all. Good news is after the talk today, if you still need time to write, you'll have time afterwards today. But for now, I'm going to welcome up my dear friend and one of my favorite people to talk with and just have deep conversations with, and that is Erica Horn. So please welcome Erica as she joins us. I know. Wanted to help you. Yeah, just wanted to. Actually, so there's kind of this debate, just as a way to start. So John likes the high chairs, but Daniel and myself prefer these chairs to sit in. So I will say some of these chairs are broken, so some of them are less comfortable than others. Yeah. So, but that's an aside.
We need to get some glue and fix that.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll add that to the list. So how has your day been, just by way of things?
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know about anybody else, but I was really into my own Sunday school class this morning.
Yeah. I was also there, and I was also really enjoying it.
So I enjoyed both preparing and then the real thing. Yeah, it's been a good day.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of fun because Sunday school kind of teed up for a lot of the things we're going to talk about today. But for now, I actually want to go back to 2 weeks ago on Thursday. You and I went to Louisville, and we saw Nadia Bowles-Weber, who's a wonderful pastor in the affirming community, and was participating in an event called Red State Revivals, where Nadia was intentionally only going to red states, so she was leaving what she called her blue bubble, and was going to only red states to talk about a different view of God and the church and Jesus. And I just kind of wanted to get, like, what was some of your opinions of that particular night?
Oh, I loved it. I loved her. She's interesting. I mean, she's got a very. I really wonder if you have to have been a drug addict to have some of these experiences that people describe, because so many of them are recovering addicts of something. And I don't think that's true, but she fits in that category. But she's also very Lutheran. That's the denomination that she's chosen. And I thought the first thing that she said, well, first off, the idea of doing a red state revival I thought was a fabulous idea. And the second thing was, one of the things she said really early was that she needed to do that Red State Revival or the Red State Revivals, and they're all sold out.
Yep.
They're all sold out. And there were 650 people there that night.
Which is crazy. It was so packed.
650 people at an Episcopal church in downtown Louisville. And she said she was not willing to cede Christianity to Christian nationalists.
I know. I also found that so fascinating.
Yeah, that was her starting point.
Yeah.
And she was very real, and she described Jesus, and there's one word I can't remember, but she describes her early images of Jesus as the one that I was thinking about it this morning when Sheena was talking, the one that little kids would come to, and she said he was some combination of like this man who would walk through the forest and the birds would come and land on his shoulder, like Cinderella, and then Mr. Rogers.
Yes, exactly.
And I thought about how many of us probably hold some version of that as how we see Jesus, and how that may have been one side. But I think today, I don't think that's the important side. I think the important side is the upender of what was norm, of the societal norm. The person who would not stand for the way that the emperor or the governor or whoever it was said it was going to be. So that was, I liked that.
Yeah. I also wrote that down, that she would not concede faith to nationalists. I love that her early days of thinking about Christianity, she would put, was full of bad poetry and lofty ideals. One of the things that I really loved about it that I haven't fully got my mind around was how her view of Jesus and God were malleable from her 20s to her 30s to her 40s to her 50s. I thought that was so interesting. The idea of, and it is, and we'll talk about this more later, of a very universal Christ idea, right? Where God comes in and meets you exactly where you are. Yeah. And that was probably like my microdose hope section, right? Because me sitting in a church full of room with 650 people is not exactly that used to be my idea of a great day. And now it's like, okay, I can do hard things. I can go in. I can sit through this shit. Yes, we can do hard things. It makes me feel so much better that she said shit a lot. Actually, that made me feel really good inside. I was like, okay, whew, my language. All right, I feel at home, and that was. But this idea of what we're going to talk about more today, she really talked about specifically mercy, forgiveness, and grace in a way that I hadn't heard talked about in a while, in the sense of, screw the nationalists. This is the real thing, and how that was easy for her, because that's hard for me. And what it reminded me of is whenever I talked to the new evangelicals here back in October or November, and they said something similar. And I was like, huh. They're like, yeah, we're not giving this to them. And of course, I look at the stats and figures, and I'm like, I think we've already given it to them. Like, they are definitely dominating the airwaves. Yeah. But I love your concept. But I say that, and this is just kind of a fun throwaway fact. So Tim and April, who I interviewed, host a show, and people, just individuals, boosted their podcast to number 4 in the Christian sphere.
Wow,
and they
awesome.
Beat up all, and I mean, it just, like this, not the new evangelicals when they started a new one called the Tim and April show, because it's more culture, faith, news intersect. That's the one they bumped to number 4 on the spiritual chart, so they beat out. They were losing the Catholics, is the ironic part, but they beat out a lot of the nationalists, and I was like, huh, maybe there is something to that. While we were there, though, she had us even sing this Rumi quote, which I really like, and literally the phrase is, "No caravan despair." And so to help me ask you this question, I will give you a definition of despair that just disappeared. That's so mean. My phone betrayed me. I really like this definition, which is despair is the claustrophobic feeling. It's the emotion that says nothing will change, and it's twinged in hopelessness. So what do you think of why we sang that night, and what are your thoughts on despair on the whole?
Yeah, well, I didn't understand it in the moment,
Mm.
and I don't understand it much better now. I especially didn't understand as it related to her story, but it was obviously something that was very personal. And I struggled with whether or not, I am a lawyer after all, whether or not the preposition of was between caravan and
Yeah.
despair.
Yeah.
We are no caravan of despair, and it is a song. I mean,
Yeah.
I looked it up after
Yeah.
I saw this question because I was like, oh man, But here is a summary of how I think about a lot of the things you said.
Mm-hmm.
So my hope is in the fundamental principle that love wins. My entire faith is built on those two words. And I didn't have those two words until Susan and I got married, and
Yeah.
Bethany had a picture of this really a banner that's hanging down, and it says "Love Wins." I'd love to have that, but and every time I feel hopeless or
Yeah.
start to feel hopeless or can't figure out where this is all going, or what it is I'm supposed to do about it, that's my default. And so I would say we are no caravan of despair. By definition, Christians, not to be confused with Christian nationalists, have that ultimate hope. And it's a hope that exists for the world we live in today. I know it's far off.
I think that's safe to say.
Ooh. But also for whatever it is that we've been promised would come. But I think that's far less important than how it impacts us today. Because we can't give up.
Yeah.
And whatever it is that motivates you not to give up, just call it Christian if you want to, if you need to, whatever it is, if it's the need to see the next, this doesn't apply to you guys. What's something that you really look forward to? What would you stop everything for to see? Or have, or do? Somebody, anybody. What's that? George Clooney.
I appreciate the honesty. That makes sense to me. And you said church or sex, right? Church.
So whatever that is that stops you in your shoes or whatever, that has to be our equivalent of hope.
Yeah.
Our equivalent of, and perhaps you want that for everybody else too. I mean, theoretically, with the things that we love, we want to share.
Yeah.
And so however we need to ground ourselves to get to that. I mean, in those instances, whether it's church, sex, George Clooney, Hoka shoes, which I learned last time I was here.
Yeah.
Those are things that bring us joy. Those are things that we might even love, or love the idea of. And there are those things then that give us hope. And so, everybody says, well, what if, some people say, I believe in Christianity because what if I'm wrong? I mean, why not, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the alternative, the whole, well, they don't see this as an alternative, but the alternative to being Christian is hellfire and brimstone.
Right.
That's not Christian. Would be because that's not love. That would be my definition of the backside. I'm not going to give that up for anybody. I could be wrong, but I'm not going to know if I'm wrong. And in the meantime, I want that hope and that love, however minuscule it might be, for everybody.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, how many of you feel a little bit despair, right? Just within the current political climate.
Yeah, read
like,
the newspaper.
Yeah, like how many of you feel just a little bit of despair? I mean, I think that's fair to say that we're all feeling a little bit of like, what's going on? It's going at 1,000,000 miles a minute. I can't even keep track of an eighth of it. And part of the reason I wanted to ask about the despair before we transition to the next question, which is about Lent, right, is the Christian tradition really values Lent as like this season of sacrifice so that we can get to the great.
Depends on what constitutes your tradition.
Yeah, true.
Right?
True. But a lot of people talk about all the suffering and all the stuff and how it leads to Holy Week. Exactly. So, I wanted to ask you because, Lent is an interesting season. Part of my contemplation, one of the questions I'm asking myself right now is like, do we really need it? Right? It doesn't mean it can't be valuable, but do we really need it? Those are different things. So where are you currently at with Lent, and especially its relationship with that Holy Week that, we're going to be in forever?
I couldn't believe when somebody said today was the second or third week in Lent. I'm like, we haven't already been here 40 days and 40 nights.
Exactly.
Actually, I wonder how many days it's been since Trump ran the first time. That's how many days we've been in this wilderness.
Yeah. 2015. It's been about a decade.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So I don't know that I've ever had. I didn't grow up with strong understanding of Lent. It's interesting. My granddaughter and her parents are Catholic, so that's a very real and different thing. And
yeah.
I fed her chicken nuggets on Friday. No meat on Fridays. Well, she asked a very legitimate question. She's 9. Is chicken meat? I was like, well, is chicken grown in the laboratory, or is it a real chicken, or I don't know.
Yeah.
But why is that? Instead, every liturgical season, so I like Advent. I like Advent because, not Advent the whole season, just the first day of Advent, because it's a different New Year's Day than New Year's Day, which has been way overplayed, right? None of us can start something on January 1st and keep it up more than 29 days at the most.
I mean, especially if you drink on the 31st, you're setting yourself up for failure.
So Lent, if you needed another time to start over, Lent would be another time to start over. Easter would be another time to start over. Christmas would be another time to start over. Epiphany. One of the good things about being Christian, whether we want to use the term or not, is we've got every moment of every day to start over.
Yeah.
Whatever that means for us. Whether it's starting over just to be more hopeful. So before I came, I was reading the despicable ways in which the Kentucky General Assembly acted and quote-unquote legislated on Friday night from 10 to 11:59. And there was nothing about love in that.
No.
Except one woman had either the guts or the gall, depending on what side of the aisle you're on, to stand up and say, show a little mercy. Can you not show a little mercy?
I love it because a lot of you in here may not know this, but it matters for our church as a whole. There's this group called the Lexington Affirming Faith Coalition that John actually started, and it's got all these different ministry leaders in it. So Unitarian and other different practices. Some of them are Christian churches. A lot of them are not. They went to that as part of that protest. That group is representing in there, so that we had a piece in that, even though John was traveling. That was one of the things they did. And so Rainbow, one of the leaders in it who went with us to see Nadia, was sending me Instagram stuff about what they did and the advocation. So it is this, in the midst of all that very evil, terrible decision making, there's that little microdose hope of, oh, there it is. There's something. There are people fighting.
Yeah. There was one person who got it and had the courage to say something about it.
Yeah.
And your earlier comment, I don't know if any of you have ever read anything by Sarah Bessey, but her post last week was about whether or not to call yourself Christian. And she said what you said a minute ago. She said, we didn't necessarily see the Christian nationalists co-opting our faith. It's just all of a sudden we look and it's been done. And that's how it feels. And I'm sure that those gentlemen who voted the way they did believe themselves to be Christians. But I don't know how you can ignore the reality of so many people. And this, I guess what I'm saying, guys, is I don't want you to think that I think today or any day is just a great day with daisies and roses and pretty colors. And
They just need to come.
whatever.
They just need to come to Sunday school, and
Yeah.
they know.
Because you can just say any Republican politician's name, and I just about come unglued. All right, I have no tolerance. Here I go for that kind of ignorance. And the fact that they can legislate and have a supermajority in this state, I'm looking into whether or not we can create, like Lexington and Louisville, our own country. And we leave all the red voters here in Kentucky, so Trump doesn't need us or want us.
Right.
He would probably try to deport us, and we would probably all willingly go. So anyway.
Well, it is fascinating because one person that has had a huge impact in your life, and I've read a lot of their work too for a different reason, just because of health issues I've had. But Kate Bowler does have a different perspective on each of these seasons and argues that we can be cranky through these seasons. She wrote a little page-a-day thing that's like, have a beautiful and cranky Lent.
You know what she said today? She said, it wasn't today, it was just that I happened to be listening today. She said Lent is the season when even God is a loser. And none of us have ever thought of God as a loser. But I thought that was, she said, so all us losers, here we are. Yeah, she takes the seasons far more stringently than I do, but she's a church historian, so why wouldn't she?
But her and Nadia have a similar habit where they really put their experience at the forefront of all of their thoughts in the way they present these ideas, right? Like, and she was very careful with her words, Nadia, here, because she wanted to say fuck, but she didn't. So she said, muck up your faith, do it wrong, and restart as many times as it takes. Because God loves you and is with you through every single one of those steps. And that's very similar to what Kate's experience is, right? With cancer and then it coming into remission. And it's just, wow. And these people, when you go through experiences like that, it really does kind of change your perspective in life. And I do find that, and I would imagine that's probably why they cling on to certain forms so they can have presence. And I think that's when someone that I greatly respect, Casper ter Kuile, wrote that article, I was like, oh, that makes sense. People need form. But in all of this, what I find fascinating is I was reading this opening intro to A Daily Meditation by Richard Rohr, and John Roller actually taught me this. This is funny, just for all the people who are Asbury people who laugh at this. He taught me this while we were both at Asbury. We were both very much so evangelical at the time. And he looked at me and he said the phrase, and it messed up my mind for about a month until I accepted it. And he said, you know, Jesus only spoke in half-truths. And I went, what? What are you saying to me right now? In 2010, and he said that because, and Rohr gave pretty clear language to it, that Jesus quoted scripture for whatever means he wanted. He didn't try to make it hermeneutical at all. He just spoke into the culture and just did it. And that's why even other religions are so fascinated by the person of Jesus, is he brought a different layer. For them, it's mysticism, right? For us, people in the Christian tradition, he would become the Christ. But he brought all of that in because he spoke it as a different way, and that's why his way of articulating that was to bring his experience of that culture into those readings.
Yeah, so two things come to mind. One, was it John that said that Jesus quoted scripture out of context all the time?
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Because we get told that we get shamed for that theoretically, right?
Yeah.
And there's clearly no reason to be shamed. The other thing I would say to the comment that he talked in half-truth was, I would probably say no, but we only could see half of the truth.
Yeah, and his argument, too, at that time was there was intentional mystery in it. There was intentional not understanding in what Jesus...
There sure was a lot of that. And even today, if we try to read the Bible, there's way more mystery than we're comfortable with.
Well, and Richard Rohr also pointed out, yeah, it's funny. It's translated in Greek. Jesus didn't speak Greek. We have very little of the actual Aramaic that Jesus spoke in of the New Testament.
Right.
So that means it was also translated into a language that Jesus didn't speak, which means that we have to understand the angle and the cultures it was translated to speak to, and how they're not a perfect parallel of our culture and day. It's similar to, I'm reading this very interesting book about friendships, which is something I feel like I'm shit at. And one of the things that we all want to do, right, is we want to go to, for me, I like to talk to my grandma, and I remember I was talking to her about texting, and Grandma looked at me and goes, "You're teaching me how to text. I can help you with a lot of things, but text messaging is not the thing that I can help you with. I'm so sorry. I love you. It's going to work out, but me answering your text messaging question, you're teaching me how to use text messages, Logan." And I was like, that's a good point. You really barely know how to send a text. And that makes sense because you are 89, so that's totally fair.
True enough.
But that is this, with that says, is there are things that aren't perfect parallels from cultures. And so how do we do? That's what gave permission for nationalism to come in.
Did it, or is that what gives, nationalism, Christian nationalism is a complete betrayal and misunderstanding, if you want to even give them that benefit of the doubt, of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Because it's the opposite. So if you name, actually this is a pretty good list. If you name something the Christian nationalists think, then just pick an opposite word and that will be what Jesus really meant. So
this is fun. She brought papers.
Division, conflict, us versus them, racism, nationalism, God or Christ, unity, healing, one humanity, all of us only. Hierarchy, inequality, and domination, equity, equality, cooperation. Power as a force to coerce others into your own way of thinking. Power as love. Retribution versus forgiveness. Servitude and enslavement versus mutual service. Coerced conversion to a pretend dominant culture or religion. Invitation to become better human beings. Exclusion, inclusion, violence, nonviolence, scarcity, abundance, win-lose, win-win, death-producing, life-enhancing, authoritarianism, plutocracy, multiracial democracy, unity via coercing, conformity, or expulsion, unity via embracing diversity and creativity. That is the difference between what Christian nationalists claim and what is really the gospel, the life, and the teaching of Jesus, the Christ.
Yeah.
And they couldn't be more different. And so one of Logan's questions, and I think one of the things you all have been talking about, and that Andrew and John talked about last week is, do I hold on to the term Christian?
Yeah, that's where I was going.
Yeah. And this list, this chart, this differentiation is exactly why I won't let it go. Now, I might, so the reason I have my phone up here is because this first part of this blog is really good. So she says, what do you say if somebody asks you if you're Christian? And she says, well, let's see. I am Christian, but not the January 6th kind.
We've got to put that out there now.
Hang on, it gets better. It's really good. I am Christian, but not the fascist kind. I am Christian, but not the voting for felons who mock the disabled and assault women kind. And then I don't know how she strung these together, and you have to bear with me because it's long. Yes, I am Christian, but I am not the science-denying, anti-vaccination, Nazi saluting, Ukraine abandoning, bullying, Canadian sovereignty threatening, cruelty embracing, any ends justifies the means, anti-immigrant, DEI dismantling, marriage equality fighting, anti-refugee, violence craving, tiki torch carrying, rape excusing as long as they're on my side politically, alternative reality, conspiracy theory, patriarchal, dominating, power-hungry, money-obsessed, virtue signaling while destroying others, nationalist kind.
That's a lot of caveats to add.
That is that, and she says maybe I got carried away there, and your friend says, "Oh, okay." The one who asked you if you were a Christian. So, yeah, and so that's not what any of us in this room think. We're not those. We're not that. And what I would do, Logan, is I would say I would never talk about the Christian nationalist. I would never use, here's what I think. I'll use the phrase Christian, but not without always differentiating that from a Christian nationalist or fundamentalist, whatever word
That's right.
hits the bucket for that particular person. So yeah, I won't give that up to them, but I will make the distinction.
Well, and that's part of why I quoted the malleable piece, right, for each season. Because the part that paved way for Christian nationalism, and now the worst part is it started in the fundamentalism, which is Christian literalism. And so again, I have to quote something from Asbury where they taught me actually correctly, not incorrectly, was I was taught that what they called biblical literalism was mistaken. They said the Bible is infallible, not inerrant.
Which is supposed to be different somehow.
Yeah, well, and to be fair to the person that taught that to me, they did have a solid thing of like the message, the story has a lot of truth that's applicable. I think they were still too much in a certain lane in that way. And that's fine, because that's just how I've had to, and this is where the malleable part comes in, that's how I've had to make my relationship with God different is, okay, I can't, some of the crap they're taking, I can't take. But something that I do think is important as we're talking about this, and we put all these caveats on, is something Nadia said that I struggled with. And I struggle with things whenever I know it's like, shit, I need to get it together on
Too
this.
close to hope.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
she said the phrase, love my enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Forgive my enemies. And then she was very honest and said, that's the worst good news I've ever heard in my life. And she's right, because it's hard.
It's impossible.
It's so, and with the context of what we're talking about in this circle, so my question for you, we do have to add caveats if we claim the Christian word. And that's why people like Daniel, Andrew, myself, we do struggle with that, right? Because we have been subject to a level of scrutiny under that is more than painful. It's traumatizing.
Well, yeah, if you have been beaten with the word Christian,
Yeah,
or
forced to
beaten
therapy.
by
Yeah.
a quote-unquote Christian,
Yep.
now known as a Christian nationalist,
Yeah.
yeah, by golly, you're going to struggle.
Yeah.
I mean, how are you not going to struggle? And thank God that God is bigger than the rest of us, because only God can deal with that. I can't forgive that.
Yeah.
I can't make that go away. I won't, and I won't. I won't understand it. Now, maybe I'm as guilty as they are at that point. But what the violence done by the church, capital C church,
Yep.
whether it's to LGBTQIA plus folks or all the other ways that the church has acted so violently.
Yeah, we forget Christianity was a driver of Nazism.
It's inexcusable.
Yeah, and it was. I mean, it played a huge hand, and Rachel Maddow wrote a really excellent book about that, and part of the hoodwinking was getting religion on their side. So that
Well, here we are.
so that's part of the that's always part of the hoodwink tactic. Tragically, right?
It's the scariest part.
Yeah,
It's the
and
scariest part.
but I do think that there is something in, and it's the Desmond Tutu who helped me, because he has that horrible story, and that so we're reading this really interesting book written in 2007, I might add, where Brian McLaren is talking about all the terrible things going on in the world back in the former Republican administration that broke him and his faith. So this is pre what's going on today. And one of the things that it talked about was it shared this story about where Desmond Tutu said, they gave us Bibles and they invited us to pray. We closed our eyes, and when we opened them, we had the Bibles they gave us, but they took our land. And then I'm reading this book by him, and I'd heard part of it through a different book I read, where he went on this journey with his daughter to forgive those people who took that land. He's not won me over yet, but I do love this phrase. The concept is, and I think maybe this is the invitation of Christ in this, maybe, is, and Nadia said this similarly, is that hooks are painful, and they hurt us. So the reason we let it go is not because we can trust them ever again. We can't. I bet you Desmond never closed his eyes to pray with anyone ever again. But what it did do was it released him.
Yeah, so very, very early, before some of you were born, unfortunately, one of the first, so I knew a couple guys who went and purposefully lived where Liberty University is located. And one of those guys was Falwell's ghostwriter. And like many, suddenly the light shone bright, the scales fell away, and he understood the error of his ways. So he moves across the street with his male partner, and puts out front, "Gay is okay," big banner. And every Liberty University student has to pass that every day when they go by to go to school. And he said, the name of the organization is Soul Force. And he said, you cannot be an activist until you have given up the hate for those that you are protesting against. That activism comes from a place of love, not a place of fear or hate. And that's what made me think about that, is that's probably why Desmond Tutu went along trying to figure out how he could forgive those people, because who knows who said it, but whoever said words to the effect of, truth, forgiveness will set you free. I had that experience in a couple different ways. And when I gave up all the animosity and feelings that I had been harboring and carrying with me about the other, I had a lot more capacity to see and understand and actually love. And I also was lucky enough. So this one man, I mentioned I'm a lawyer. I practiced law for 25 years, and this one guy did me dirty, very dirty. Went home that day, and my mother didn't know whether to call 911 or what to do because I was absolutely hysterical. And I spent, every single person that I talked to about it said, "Erica, you've got to let this go, and you need to apologize to him." And I'm like, when hell freezes over. I mean, absolutely no way. I'm right, he's wrong, and I'm not going there. I'm right, he's wrong, and I am not going there. And then I don't know what changed over 3 or 4 years, but eventually I ran into him in the parking garage one time after work, and I said, "John, I am really sorry about the way that stuff played out between us. I didn't take any responsibility for what he said I did because that wasn't right. But I was sorry that I had carried that anger and carried that vendetta all that time." And he stopped in his tracks and said, "Thank you. I wasn't any friendlier or less friendly.
That's right.
I wasn't any different necessarily after that.
That's right.
But I was far more free." And I don't know if it would have made any difference or not, guys, but he died of a brain tumor like 4 or 5 years later.
Wow.
So I'm glad I did that. And so when I think about my vitriol, I'm not ready to be an activist because I don't have that right mindset, or I'm not in that place. I'm just furious with, well, I would dehumanize them by saying the reasons I'm furious.
Yeah, it is.
So.
It is interesting, right? Because there is a boundary line when you're having the forgiveness, mercy, and grace conversation.
True.
And that is, you never deny people their trauma. A lot of you in here, myself included, have gone through traumatic experiences that plain and simple were not okay. They were not good. And nothing about God makes us better.
Nothing to take away from what y'all been through, but 25 years of practicing law has a very similar impact.
Oh, I believe it. I believe it. Yes, like you.
My God.
Well, they do say being a lawyer takes away your soul. So.
Yeah, I mean, it does. I mean, yeah. I mean, I look at it and I'm like, oh, gosh.
Yeah, it's interesting though, right? Because you have to have that boundary line for the trauma that people go through. And the best that can be offered is knowing that You can sit with people in that pain, and each person's trauma is different, and there is no easy way, and that healing takes a ton of time. I don't know if I'll ever really be healed from it, but I can just keep showing up is really the best I've got right now.
And maybe it's okay not to be healed from it because it does give you the ability to sit
That's
with
right.
someone else.
That's right. It does.
And understand and hear.
That's right.
And feel. And one thing about Kate Bowler, who I have a girl crush on, is her mantra and the name of her group is Everything Happens. And she's all about holding the tension between the horrificness of the world and our politics right now and our lives in some moments and the joy that you might get from seeing nine-year-olds lined up in little single mattresses across a basement floor for a sleepover. I mean, just 9 little girls all perfectly swished across this basement. Or the joy you get from church or Hoka's or George Clooney or sex or whatever it is that moment, and to hold those things in tension. So we went to Disney World. It was the best of times and the worst of times. Okay? I mean, it was fabulous in some moments and it was hideous in some moments.
That's right.
And I used to think it had to be either or.
Yeah.
But it's both.
Yeah.
And our lives are both.
That's right. So, no big answers from us, which I love, and that's probably the best part
There are
about
no
Woven.
answers.
Yeah.
Right, Mom? No answers.
But there's this section in this book, Universal Christ, that I find pretty hopeful.
It's a great section.
Yeah, and it's called Loving Jesus, Loving Christ. So I'm going to read this to you, let Erica respond. So it's a little bit longer. It says, to be loved by Jesus enlarges our heart capacity. To be loved by the Christ enlarges our mental capacity. We need both a Jesus and a Christ, in my opinion, to get the full picture. A fully transformative God for both the individual and history needs to be experienced as both personal and universal. Nothing less will fully work. If the overly personal, even sentimental Jesus has shown itself to have severe limitations and problems, it is because this Jesus was not also universal. He became cozy and we lost the cosmic. History has clearly shown that worship of Jesus without worship of Christ invariably becomes a time and culture-bound religion, often ethnic or even implicitly racist, which excludes much of humanity from God's embrace. I fully believe, however, that there has never been a single soul who is not possessed by the Christ, even in the ages when Jesus was not. Why would you want your religion or your God to be any smaller than that? For you who have felt angered or wounded or excluded by the message of Jesus or Christ as you have heard it, I hope you sense an opening here, an affirmation, a welcome that you may have despaired of ever hearing. For you who have hoped to believe in God or a divinized world, but never been able to believe in the way belief is typically practiced, does this vision of Jesus the Christ help? If it helps you to love and to hope, then it is the true religion of Christ. No circumcised group can ever claim that title. For you who have loved Jesus, perhaps with great passion and protectiveness, do you recognize that any God worthy of the name must transcend creeds and denominations, time and place, nations and ethnicities, and all the vagaries of gender extending to the limits of all we can see, suffer, and enjoy? You are not your gender, your nationality, your ethnicity, your skin color, or your social class. Why, oh why, do Christians allow these temporary costumes, or what Thomas Burton called the false self, to pass for the substantial self, which is always hidden with Christ and God? It seems that we really do not know our own gospel. You are a child of God, and always will be, even when you don't believe it. What are your thoughts?
So what I liked about the universal Christ, and if you've ever tried to read Richard Rohr and you get to the end of the paragraph and you're like, what?
Yep.
Then you really have read Richard Rohr. Because, like Logan said today, he didn't understand about 80% of it, and I don't understand about 95. But what I understood was this. He's making a distinction between the human and the divine, all right? He's moving beyond the person of Jesus, the historical Jesus, and the divine Christ, which is God. And it's interesting, John uses the word Jesus way more than I do. I defaulted to God a long time ago.
Me too.
Because Jesus is too limiting. And I'm not going to pray in Jesus' name. That dude was fine, all right? But here's my ultimate, where I come down. Matt and I were talking at the end of the day. Rohr's story, his picture of the universal Christ, is that there is an element of God in each and every element of creation.
Yep.
Not just you and me, blades of grass, crickets, snakes, clouds, everywhere. And that limiting ourselves to the historical Jesus is exactly that, it's limiting. But that speck of God in us is something that God will always hold on to. And so, whatever constitutes the end, if there is one, God is never going to give up on you. God is never going to give up on me. Guys, God is never going to give up on Donald Trump, Mitch McConnell, Adolf Hitler.
It killed you saying Mitch McConnell, didn't it?
You know, he's my worst. I can understand Trump better. But much to our chagrin, right? That's not the human way that we do it. Mm-hmm. And that's because Christ, or God, is way bigger than anything that we can understand. And so I try to, that's right back to my love wins. God is going to win, whatever you want to call it, the heart, the soul, the life, the love of everything. Full stop.
Yeah. And the great news is, love wins regardless of whether you call it Christ, God, or not.
Amen.
That's where it is. So we've decided that we are going to reevaluate Jesus and Christ in this season in this particular service. And we have no idea where it's taking us. So what's one piece of hope that you have for us by just reevaluating Jesus and Christ?
I mostly have nothing but questions about everything. But it just takes me back to where I started. I have to hang on to the idea. I don't know if there was a physical resurrection. I don't know if I don't know if Jesus really came up. I don't know. And frankly, I don't care. But I do believe that because if I don't, I've got nothing, guys. I don't know what to do with myself. There's no way to center myself if I don't have the idea that on Easter, love won. And because without that, this is just a desperate, nasty, ugly place that no one wants to be.
Yeah.
And that's not where I choose to live. So I'm going to live right there on the other side of, quote unquote, the cross, where God wins.
Thank you, Erica.
Sure.
So great. So I'm going to read for us a rest, and then as you leave, we can call it communion today because it's been blessed. Take some communion as you go out today. So let your soul receive this rest. The divine, who is both visible and invisible, near and far, small and grand, has mercy on you. Allow them to liberate you from the bondage of certainty, that you would walk freely into curiosity, imagination, and sacred unknowing. Amen. You can take communion as you go. Thanks. And we'll see you next week.